As Venerable Deci, the first sword in Kalanxo hammered out a new form of cooperation in a desperate attempt to withstand the shockshell's furious attacks. Venerable Rebecca grew more annoyed at her opponent's refusal to submit to the storm. A powerful soldier of her caliber should have been able to overwhelm an ordinary mid-tier expert Mech, controlled by a relatively inexperienced expert pilot a long time ago. These Larkinson Mechs are too abnormal, Venerable Rebecca cursed. This was not a secret to the Friday men. It was well known that the Larkinson clan treated its Mechs differently than other organizations. The combination of a highly innovative Mech designer and lots of funding produced Mechs that were extremely perverted in different ways. A typical offensive machine that was mostly designed to attack would have never been able to hold out this long against the shockshell's thunderous attacks. Venerable Rebecca did not hold back in the slightest when she fully activated the transphasic functions of the shockshell's weapons. Though the drain on her willpower became a lot greater than before, it was worth the expenditure as long as she could quickly take down one of the Larkinson clan's trump cards. The problem was that she wasn't able to gain the payoff that she wanted. The shock hammer constantly pounded towards the first sword, only for the enemy's greatsword to intercept the hammer. Powerful arcs of electricity constantly bombarded the expert swordsman Mech and its weapon, only for them to endure the damage without any significant consequences. The most confounding part about the first sword's increasingly more effective defensive measures was that its aura had changed. A familiar giant lizard had descended onto the expert Mech, infusing it with greater defensive strength that proved to be remarkably effective at blunting the more extraordinary properties of the incoming attacks. "What is this beast?" Venerable Rebecca questioned as the expert swordsman Mech no longer felt so simple to her senses. Previously, the first sword came across as a sharp blade that could cut through anything. Now, that image had weakened in order to make room for a giant and surprisingly resilient alien lizard. As Venerable Rebecca strengthened her efforts to engulf the first sword in her storm, she found that it was a lot harder to shock and paralyze this giant lizard with her willpower. This was because she was no longer able to suppress Venerable Deci's willpower directly. One of the main reasons why Vess had always been reluctant to replace the unending alloy integrated in his first batch of expert Mechs was because it was a spiritually reactive material. Vess, who had always believed in the strength of intangible phenomena, took advantage of this property to turn Mechs, such as the first sword, into a prime Mech. Though this aspect no longer attracted as much attention anymore, since every expert Mech had access to true resonance, that did not mean that prime resonance was weak. In fact, certain expert pilots such as Venerable Joshua had shown that combining prime resonance with true resonance often resulted in dramatically more powerful effects. Right now, the first sword showed off the potential of prime resonance in combination with an expert Mech, forming a brand new defensive barrier that was primarily based on Kalanxo's domain rather than that of Venerable Deci. This was made possible by the hundreds of Vess worth of spiritual energy that Kalanxo had infused into the first sword. In normal times, this amount of spiritual energy was already enough to make it difficult for ordinary people to remain close to the first sword at ordinary times. It wasn't until the living Mech had grown up to a sufficient extent that it was able to reduce the external pressure of its heavy glow. Though the first sword didn't carry as much spiritual energy derived from a design spirit as many of the other prime Mechs in the Larkinson clan, it was still enough for Venerable Deci to amplify with the help of true resonance. As Gauss rounds, electrical bolts, positron beams, shock hammer strikes, and electrified kicks continually pummeled the first sword under its current state, none of the attacks made as much progress as before. The only attacks that had a chance of dealing at least some internal damage were those launched by the shockshell's transphasic weapons, and even then they failed to achieve as much effect as before. Part of it was because Kalanxo used to be able to manipulate the fabric of space in her centuries of lifetime on a savage planet. Her subsequent death and ascension only strengthened her application of her spatial abilities even further. This meant that Kalanxo just happened to possess the right spiritual attribute to effectively restrain and neutralize against the transphasic properties of the incoming attacks. Not only that, but the previous disparity in mental strength no longer applied. Instead of pressing her willpower upon a weaker and less developed expert pilot, Rebecca instead found herself hitting a wall as she tried and failed to shake the powerful mentality of a former sacred god that had once reigned as the queen of a pantheon in a primitive society. The difference in strength, mental resilience, and other mental properties were too great. For once, venerable Rebecca was no longer able to take advantage of her age and development time, as Kalanxo had lived almost 5 times longer than the enemy expert pilot. One of the consequences to all of this was that the powerful new transphasic tech at her disposal no longer made a difference in her fight against the First Sword. "What are you made of? Why do you Larkinsons design such weird mechs? There shouldn't be any face water in your mech." The powerful high-tier expert pilot did not believe that the First Sword could last forever against the storm. Even if the shockshell's formidable arsenal was no longer able to bypass the defenses of the First Sword, then it would just keep attacking and attacking until the strange spatial barrier finally ran out of energy. "I don't believe your new defenses will be able to last much longer." This was unfortunately true. Kalanxo was a spiritual life form that ultimately existed in another realm. It took considerable strain on the part of Venerable Deci and the First Sword to channel just a portion of the big lizard's might from afar. "Orphan," Deci shouted, "hurry up and relieve me. I don't have any other measures left." The riot at this time had just recovered from getting bounced away yet again. Even though the expert spearman Mech had yet to crack the means to defeat the infamous repulsion wave, Venerable Orphan had at least managed to drain Venerable Rebecca's willpower quite a bit by forcing the shock shell to perform its costly move over and over. However, Venerable Rebecca still had plenty of energy left to push away the riot at least a dozen more times. It was not as if Venerable Orphan had tried to figure out another way to overcome the repulsion wave, but the problem was that she hadn't figured out an effective solution. She had tried envisioning herself and her expert Mech as a giant spear that could pierce through her opponent's repulsion wave. She had tried to imagine the riot as a large and dense planet that could break through any obstacle by relying on brute force. She had even attempted to hypnotize herself into thinking that her riot was an invisible and incorporeal ghost in a particularly stupid attempt to make the repulsion wave bypass her expert Mech as if it didn't exist. Suffice to say, the riot still got pushed away without any other effect. "I'm not good at this," Venerable Orphan complained. "The difference in power is too great." She experienced the same problem as her good friend, Deci. When it came to willpower and resonance manipulation, neither of them could overpower the strong will of an ace pilot candidate. It wasn't until she noticed what Venerable Deci was doing to better defend against the shockshell's onslaught that Venerable Orphan became inspired. As someone who was more used to cooperating with Kalanxo, she had already tried to rely on the design spirit's strength to overcome the repulsion wave, but not to this extent. "Kalanxo, if you still have something to spare for me, help me break through this annoying repulsion wave." The riot did not blindly charge forward at this time. Instead, Venerable Orphan made her expert Mech turn around and circle around in a wide loop. The expert spearman Mech was building up momentum. Due to the upgraded flight system of the riot, it did not take too long for the expert spearman Mech to build up a respectable amount of speed. Once Venerable Orphan thought that her riot gained enough speed relative to the shockshell, she turned her expert Mech around and charged straight towards her target with much greater momentum than before. If that was the extent of her new plan, then the shell shock merely had to invest a lot more energy to launch a repulsion wave that was strong enough to blunt the riot's powerful charge. It was only when the riot came close that it began to acquire additional qualities. The phantom of a giant lizard briefly hovered behind the riot yet again, as Venerable Orphan tried her best to bring down the savage side of Kalanxo. The corona around the riot surged. The expert Mech no longer came across as a spearman Mech to the surrounding people. Instead, a lot of Mech pilots had the illusion that the riot had willingly morphed into a giant reptilian monster, one that was hellbent on crashing into the shell shock. Go away. Venerable Rebecca definitely sensed a greater threat from the riot. As the shell shock channeled a bit of extra true resonance into its concussion shield, it released a more powerful repulsion wave than before. This time, the repulsion wave failed to push away the riot. The powerful willpower of a high-tier expert pilot proved once again that it was unable to match the strength of a centuries-old design spirit. Kalanxo seemed to roar with great anger as the design spirit felt affronted by the enemy's naked challenge. Just as the shell shock wasn't able to overcome the first sword's Kalanxo-blessed defenses, the repulsion wave was unable to achieve the desired effect against the riot, because it had been blessed by the giant lizard as well. Without the amplification provided by Venerable Rebecca's condensed force of will, the repulsion wave was not that powerful anymore. The wave passed over the riot's exterior like it was a simple breeze. Venerable Orphan became ecstatic when she saw that her riot continued to get closer to her target. "Ha, not so tough now, are you? Taste my spear." Though Venerable Rebecca did not expect the riot to break past the strengthened repulsion wave this time, she reacted quickly and turned her shell shock around. A violent explosion erupted from the collision between the two expert Mechs. The riot's spear had driven into the shell shock's concussion shield, causing both expert Mech to unleash multiple different energies. By the time the riot had ended its charge, the shell shock's resonance shield had weakened by a substantial margin. "You're mine now," Venerable Orphan grinned with renewed enthusiasm. Her riot stuck to the expert hybrid Mech without giving the enemy machine any reprieve. This forced the shell shock to abandon its assault against the weakened first sword in order to defend against the new threat. With the blessing of Kalanxo, Venerable Orphan no longer experienced any sort of suppression from Venerable Rebecca's electrical storm. It was as if a hurricane had downgraded to a mild wind all of a sudden. In fact, the presence of two separate expert Mech that both channeled Kalanxo's presence at once had caused the surrounding space to become affected by the design spirit's domain. It was no longer Venerable Rebecca that reigned over this portion of space. Kalanxo had forcefully taken over her territory. The new techniques and displays of power from the riot and the first sword did not go unnoticed to many people. Vess became particularly impressed by how much his two expert Mechs were able to turn the tide and regain the initiative in their fight against the shock shell. This was a remarkable turn of events, considering that neither the Fridayman expert pilot nor her high-tier expert hybrid Mech had grown any weaker. Certainly, the continuous launching of different attacks were starting to strain Venerable Rebecca's willpower and the shock shell's ammunition and energy reserves, but both of them were powerful enough to keep up the high-intensity assault for plenty more minutes. What truly allowed Venerable Orphan and Venerable Deci to turn the tables against their powerful opponent was that they had changed their combat approach by fully involving Kalanxo in the fight. It was an amazing sight that enchanted more and more Mech pilots around the site. The fight between the three expert Mechs turned from a one-sided beatdown to a clash between a monster and a natural phenomenon. The shell shock did not look any weaker due to generating a faint but intimidating electrical storm manifestation around its frame. However, both the riot and the first sword seemed to have found a protector to resist against this powerful force of nature by calling upon the help of a powerful design spirit. How are these expert pilots doing all of this? What is that lizard? This expert Mech bout is starting to resemble a fight between gods. When Vess observed the shifting fight between his expert Mechs and the shock shell, He felt more and more satisfied with how his work held up under challenging circumstances. He also felt relieved that the Larkinson clan, or its allies, didn't have to draw too many resources from elsewhere in order to bail out Venerable Orphan and Venerable Deceased. There were still other powerful and troublesome opponents, such as the Star of Liberation and the Scorpion Commando, that could inflict an enormous amount of damage if left unopposed. Though Vess continued to keep an eye on the fights centered around the other two enemy high-tier expert mechs, most of his focus rested upon the Riot and the First Sword at this time. They have finally figured out the correct use of their machines. Vess smiled in satisfaction. He still recalled a discussion he held with some of his expert pilots in the past. During the period when the Larkinson clan was in the process of upgrading all of its older expert mechs to modern standards, Venerable Tusa, Venerable Orphan, and other expert pilots had specifically pointed out the lack of changes to their weapons. "Why are you so stingy, Vess?" Venerable Orphan complained. "We still have plenty of face water in storage. Why don't you draw out 1 kilogram of it and use it to make my spear transphasic? Face water technology is all the rage these days, but why haven't I heard any story about equipping our expert mechs with transphasic weapons? It's not enough for my Riot to receive an outer layer of transphasic armor. The newer expert mechs such as the Seaman and the Blade Chaser Mark Roman II can both launch transphasic attacks. Their ability to punch through resonance shields and armor are much better than ours," Venerable Tusa said. Vess merely crossed his arms in response to this inquiry. "I admit that transphasic weapon systems are strong and open up new attack options that weren't accessible to us before. If we didn't have access to powerful weapons, such as our unending alloy weapons and our Luminar crystal rifles, I would have been tempted to equip you all with transphasic weapons. Why did you decide against this, then? Do you think that unending alloy is a weak material? It is strong. Hardly anything can punch through it as long as it is thick and solid enough," Venerable Janzi replied. "Do you think that Luminar crystal weapons are weak?" Vess asked another question. "They're all strong. They just don't have the ability to bypass defenses as easily as transphasic weapons." "You guys aren't getting it." Vess shook his head in disappointment. "Let me remind you that I took part in the design of all of your machines. Maybe our other mech designers have done more work than me on certain design projects, but that does not change the fact that all of your machines are qualified living mechs. It is a core part of their identities and serve as one of their strongest advantages." "Sir, let me finish, Joshua. I will put it in simple terms so that you can quickly understand my point. Transphasic weapons and transphasic armor systems are both products that grant your mech a powerful and defined boost. We can measure the improved baseline performance of your expert mechs to a precise degree after implementing them in your machines. That is also the end of the story. If you want to leverage more power out of them, you can only rely on your own willpower to amplify their performance through generating true resonance." Venerable Orphan looked confused. "What's wrong with that? Isn't that how all expert mechs work?" Vess snorted. "You are forgetting at least 2 points that distinguish living expert mechs from their regular counterparts. The first is that a living mech that is alive enough can help you resonate with it to a greater degree. The second is that their design spirits not only serve as the source of their glows, but can also fight alongside you, if indirectly." "You mean when we utilize our prime abilities, right?" Venerable Joshua looked like he understood what Vess was trying to convey. This was not a big surprise, considering that his Evert Shanger was the machine that best fit the definition of a living mech. Vess smirked wider. "Don't misunderstand my words. I am not putting down face water technology at all. I would have integrated them in our newer expert mechs if I thought it was an awful waste of money. However, if I had a choice, I would rather equip your mechs with unending alloy armor plating and Luminar crystal weapons. This is because both of them are the best carriers of my design philosophy, far superior to weapons that are simply different because they are transphasic." So you're saying that your newer expert mechs aren't as good as your older ones because they don't have unending alloy? Venerable Vincent frowned. Each expert mech is different and unique. There is no superior tech per se. Vess responded in a diplomatic manner. You have all seen the Mars, right? That is by far the most powerful expert mech in our alliance, and it doesn't have any unending alloy. The tech that I favor is merely an alternative that just happens to align better with my design philosophy. So what does this all mean? Venerable Orphan grew confused again. What I am saying is that if your expert mech is equipped with unending alloy, you don't need transphasic weapons or parts. You just need to find a way to make better use of the prime mech properties that unending alloy imparts to your respective machines. Do you remember the battles we fought against the so-called dark gods? The expert pilots all nodded. It's hard to forget the time where we fought against those weird energy creatures. Venerable Tusa said, I would rather fight against a mech than try to challenge a giant alien bird. What if I tell you that as long as you use your living machines in the right way, you can all summon your own friendly dark god on the battlefield? What? Are you kidding? I am not joking around here. I am always serious when it comes to mechs. Vess told them. What I am saying is the truth. Perhaps you are all thinking that summoning the design spirits that you have grown familiar with is a fantasy that can only take place when you attain unity of man and machine. Several expert pilots showed a lot more interest in Vess' words than others. Venerable Vincent was perhaps the most eager of them. He was one of the rare expert pilots who had tasted the power of unity of man and machine during the Purgatory campaign. You mean I can call on my buddy Bravo again, so that I can punch whales and mechs with my giant fists? Vess raised his palm. Whoa there, not so fast, Vincent. Attaining unity of man and machine is a rare and exceptional occurrence that we should not be banking on. What I am talking about instead is to use the advantages of your living mechs to call down a portion of a design spirit's power on the battlefield. Like a guardian angel. That's a decent analogy. Entities that you are familiar with, such as Kalankso, the illustrious one, Arnold, and of course the Golden Cat, are all fairly powerful in their own way. The only problem is that they live in a different realm or dimensions or whatever, so it is hard for them to reach out to the material realm where we reside. All of the unending alloy that we have applied to some of your machines exists to make it easier for you to draw upon their strength in battle. However, most of this is theoretical. There aren't many cases where I have seen you guys employ this function to the fullest. You need to develop a closer relationship with the design spirits of your expert mechs and get them to agree to help you when you find yourself in a position where your own strength is not enough. What difference will that make, Vess? Venerable Isabel Cotin asked. Transphasic products are lifeless and unchanging, Vess replied. They can only give you a finite boost and no more. Living mechs and design spirits are more volatile, but that is what makes them great. Their upper boundaries are limitless. As long as you put enough effort in cooperating with them, you can achieve levels of synergy that I cannot even imagine. I wasn't kidding when I said that you can summon your own dark god by your side as long as your cooperation with a design spirit is good enough. His words conveyed his unflinching belief in the core tenets of his design philosophy. Ordinary technology has limits. Life is limitless. Not a lot of expert pilots took Vess' words seriously at the time. Venerable Joshua already understood the potential of Vess' work, but there were also expert pilots such as Venerable Deci who only believed in cultivating their own personal strength. However, the current situation on the battlefield of Pima Prime left the previously skeptical expert pilot with little choice but to draw upon her bond with Kalankso. Of all of the expert pilots who would be able to resonate with the design spirits of their mechs to such a degree that they could consciously manifest them in battle, Vess would have expected this display from Venerable Janzi, Venerable Joshua, or maybe Venerable Vincent. However, the extreme difficulty of fighting against Venerable Rebecca Andis, and the shock shell caused Venerable Orphan and Venerable Decease to take the first step in this novel new method of leveraging living mechs against enemies. This is a game changer, Vess immediately recognized. Although the method that the two Larkinson expert pilots employed to manifest a fraction of Kalanxo great might was relatively weak and rudimentary, Vess could already foresee its awesome potential. This was exactly what he wanted to see from his living mech. Ordinary technology has limits. Life is limitless. What took place on the battlefield went beyond technology. Vess had merely put the building blocks in place, but he could do nothing further to enable this powerful display. The strain on Venerable Orphan and Venerable Decease's willpower was great. Similar to manifesting the power of design spirits through battle formations, the two Larkinson expert pilots performed a similar feat by relying on their own efforts. Kalanxo obviously supported this effort. She did everything possible to cooperate in order to allow her to intervene more directly in the material realm. Other design spirits paid attention to this fight as well. If the method that Venerable Orphan and Venerable Decease spontaneously developed could also be applied to other living mechs and mech pilots, then the Larkinson clan may have developed a brand new approach to mech combat. As the Riot and the First Sword continued to gang up on the shock shell, the glows of the two mechs actually began to meld with each other, thereby forming a response to the prototypical domain field generated by the enemy expert pilot. The result of all of this was that a larger manifestation was able to appear in the material realm. The apparition of the giant lizard became more solid as Venerable Orphan, Venerable Decease, as well as their living mechs, worked hard to support the powerful design spirit's descent. At this point, Kalanxo had become so anchored to the material realm that it was even able to interfere more directly into the fight. When the giant exobest raised its massive head and roared, even the thunderstorm that surrounded the shock shell became affected by Kalanxo's display of might. Venerable Rebecca isn't able to suppress Venerable Orphan and Venerable Decease anymore. The shock shell is still too strong. Its resonance shield is far from losing cohesion. Send backup to help the Riot and the First Sword wear down the shock shell. The battle between the expert mechs reached a more intense stage. Previously, the shock shell relied on the amazing strength of its expert pilot and its powerful transphasic weapons to bully the two Larkinson expert mechs. Now that Kalanxo came down onto the battlefield and actively tried her best to help with holding back the enemy, the Riot and the First Sword fought as if they became unleashed. Read novel full me. Ha ha ha, not so smug now, are you? Venerable Orphan laughed as she went completely wild by launching one thrusting attack after another. Her unending alloy spear not only became infused with true resonance, but also carried a hint of Kalanxo's power, which significantly enhanced the damage potential and penetrative capabilities of the tip. Though the shock shell could still rely on its powerful resonance shield to absorb the incoming attacks, the attack frequency of the Riot was a bit too high. Ever since Dulo Voikin had taken over as the lead designer of the Riot, he had worked together with Tiffy Koslone to comprehensively upgrade the strength and speed of the expert spearman mech's attacking motions. The pair achieved excellent results, as their efforts provided Venerable Orphan with a huge amount of help in this instance. No shield can last forever. I don't believe your shell can last forever against my spear. Venerable Orphan's rejuvenated confidence amplified her attacks and allowed her to better negate the amplifying effects of her opponent's willpower. Though Venerable Rebecca still possessed an absolute advantage in this aspect, the problem was that she needed to split her concentration in order to defend against 3 opponents at the same time. In particular, the intervention from Kalanxo had tipped the balance and finally put her in a disadvantage in the mental confrontation. On top of all of this, Venerable Orphan had resumed her effort to erode the shell shock's resonance shield through leveraging the Riot's disharmony barrier. The disharmony barrier was another measure that specifically exploited and degraded the opposing mech pilot's willpower and mentality. I have never fought against an opponent that is as disgusting as you, Venerable Rebecca cursed. Venerable Orphan burst out into laughter. Ha ha ha, thank you for the compliment. If you think I'm so disgusting, then I'll accompany you even more. The riot's resonance shield shook and vibrated as it constantly tried to blend into the shock shell's resonance shield. The pollution and disharmony of the former were so strong that Venerable Rebecca wasn't able to defend as effectively against enemy attacks as before. While the riot kept the shock shell occupied, the first sword unscrupulously attacked the expert hybrid Mech from the rear. Though the shock shell had turned around its shoulder-mounted Gauss cannons and continually fired powerful transphasic rounds at the expert swordsman Mech, Kalanxo provided just enough protection to offset much of the damage from these attacks. Without any other weapons hitting the first sword, Venerable Deci was able to focus a lot more on attacking. The Decapitator sword glowed with true resonance as it struck against the shock shell's resonance shield. Once Venerable Rebecca realized that her shock shell wouldn't be able to do anything else unless she got rid of the riot first, she gave up on attacking the first sword entirely. I'll destroy you first, then. The shoulder-mounted Gauss cannons turned back to the front so that they could pound the riot's chaotic resonance shield and accelerate its decline. Venerable Rebecca already noticed how important it was to prevent the riot from exploiting its disharmony barrier any further. A flurry of electrical attacks, Gauss cannon attacks, positron beam cannon attacks, and hammer strikes impacted against the riot's resonance shield. Though the expert spearman Mech was a bit tougher than the first sword, it was still a mid-tier expert Mech piloted by a fairly inexperienced expert pilot. The riot's resonance shield quickly weakened despite Kalanxo's best efforts to prop it up. The continuous damage output of a high-tier expert Mech, and especially an expert hybrid Mech, was too horrible. Eventually, the riot lost its resonance shield first, which prevented it from utilizing its disharmony barrier to degrade the shell shock's own powerful protective barrier. The damage was already done, though. By the time the riot's X-Trans armor system began to get pounded by a combination of transphasic and more normal resonance-empowered attacks, the shell shock's resonance shield was already starting to break apart. "Break for me!" Venerable Orphan roared as the shadowy manifestation of Kalanxo also roared along. The riot's spear tip glowed brighter as Kalanxo seemed to bless the weapon. When the spear next struck the shell shock, its resonance shield finally fell apart. "Huh, you're vulnerable now. The same goes for you, idiot." The battle between the three expert Mechs entered an entirely new and more destructive phase. Though the expert Mechs also possessed conventional shield generators, they simply didn't last that long because of the frequency and power of attacks. Soon enough, the riot and the shock shell began to take serious blows to their frame. Since both of them were equipped with transphasic armor systems, they were able to resist the blows a lot better than normal. The shock shell's armor system only integrated 1.8 kilograms of face water, but since neither the riot nor the first sword possessed transphasic weapons, the expert hybrid Mech was still able to minimize the damage, no matter whether it was attacked from the front or the rear. The riot's armor system integrated around 3 kilograms of face water, which offered the expert spearman Mech a lot more resistance against the transphasic attacks of the shock shell. In fact, Venerable Rebecca found out that the attacks launched by her shock shell's positron beam cannons, electro rods, and electrified legs didn't even seem to faze the riot anymore due to their lack of transphasic capabilities. TCH, you Larkinsons have too much money. Venerable Rebecca simply gave up on utilizing those weapon systems. Though they were still capable of dealing damage, their efficiency against the riot was so low that it wasn't worth the strain and energy consumption. As the shell shock continually tried, but failed to deal enough damage to the riot, the first sword eagerly took advantage of the situation and continuously tried to launch attacks at the enemy machine's vulnerable rear. If the first sword could cripple the shell shock's exposed flight system, Then the expert hybrid Mech would turn into a sitting duck in space. It would be easy to dispose of this powerful opponent at that point. There was no way that venerable Rebecca would allow this to happen. She had to give up on going all out on demolishing the riot and turn her shock shell around just enough for it to block the first sword's sharp attacks with its concussion shield. The concussion shield was large and tough enough to resist the incoming sword attacks for a time. Seeing that the shell shock was not going down that easily, Venerable Decee's eyes glowed as she altered her fighting approach and began to launch powerful hacking sword strikes that were expressly meant to destroy physical shields. The first sword struck like an executioner, chopping through the necks of prisoners that were sentenced to death. Each and every heavy sword blow with the decapitator seemed to kill off a part of the shell shock at a time. The pressure that Venerable Rebecca faced was unprecedented, especially when the tough and hardy riot began to inflict real damage onto the shell shock from the front. "Why are you so tough?" The shell shock's transphasic shock hammer struck a heavy blow against the riot's chest, which not only caused its transphasic armor at this section to crack and become engulfed by an electrical blast, but also caused the expert spearman Mech to be pushed backwards. Even though Venerable Orphan saw this attack coming, she made no attempts to block it at all. She believed in the strength and resiliency of her riot. Though its transphasic upper layer was certainly starting to get beat up, the unending alloy that lay beneath still remained intact for the most part. "This X-Trans armor system is really great," Venerable Orphan praised, while completely ignoring the immense cost required to replace any destroyed sections of armor plating. She completely ignored Vest's earlier pleas about preserving the integrity of the riot's armor system and did not hesitate to adopt a damage trading strategy. As a result, the fight between the three expert Mech turned into a race to see which of them would falter first. Would the riot be able to withstand the barrage of transphasic attacks, or would the shell shock succumb from getting attacked from the front and rear at the same time? At this stage of the battle, the influence from Kalanxo wasn't as great anymore. Though Venerable Rebecca still couldn't maintain complete control over the environment through her prototypical domain field, she was still able to exert enough strength to protect and fortify the defenses of her shock shell as much as possible. Still, after getting hit by repeated attacks, the shell shock's armor and concussion shield finally started to show more cracks and holes despite their transphasic defenses. The riot's attacking ability was fairly strong, but the first sword was even stronger. Despite the thickness and the incredibly resilience of the shell shock's unique concussion shield, the object's condition rapidly worsened as more and more cracks and tears dug into its surface. The first sword's attacks grew sharper and sharper as Venerable Decee became more obsessed with breaking through this physical obstacle. The decapitator truly showed its value this time, as it was not only able to offset a part of the concussion shield's ability to push and negate incoming physical strikes, but also dig deeper into the concussion shield's layers than with other weapons. When Venerable Decee noticed that the opposing expert pilot had become a bit too preoccupied with trying to break the riot first, the Sword Maiden expert pilot went all out. The first sword raised its greatsword. Decee resonated with the decapitator so hard that the weapon began to glow like a beacon. An energy blade formed from the greatsword that was over 3 times the length of the actual blade. Immediately afterwards, the first sword accelerated forward and thrust the decapitator forward. Sword of Lydia. A powerful explosion of light and energy erupted from the shell shock as the sword energy blade, as well as the physical blade, punched through the weakened surface of the concussion shield and split it in half. Though the power attack lost a lot of power and failed to penetrate the shell shock's transphasic armor, the destruction of the concussion shield completely opened up the expert hybrid Mech's rear. "Cut off the shell shock's wings, Decee. I'll keep it occupied as long as possible." The riot pressed forward harder than ever and actively utilized its spear to hook around and lock the shock hammer. This not only prevented the shock shell from turning around to attack the first sword, but also locked the expert hybrid Mech in place for a time. Venerable Deci clearly recognized the situation and did not hesitate to command her first sword to launch an attack at the shock shell's reinforced flight system. However, just as the decapitator sword was about to slice through a crucial component, a thunderstorm of immense proportions erupted from the damaged shock shell. The electrical storm was so powerful that both the riot and the first sword were flung away, as if the two got repulsed by a giant magnet. What? The power emanating from the shock shell was so great that its thunderstorm not only engulfed a sphere that was at least an order of magnitude larger than before, but also dispersed Kalanxo's manifestation by force. Though a lot of people were confused why the shock shell exploded with so much power all of a sudden, a few people immediately recognized what had happened. How could this happen? Vess cried out as he shot up to his feet. Isn't this supposed to be an extremely rare occurrence? As the shock shell continued to engulf a vast portion of space around it with electrical bolts, a profound transformation took place in the mind of its expert pilot. After 120 years of living, Venerable Rebecca Andis had finally loosened her shackles and triggered her second apotheosis. The medallion guards already grew ecstatic once they figured out what had happened. They cheered and congratulated their hero for finally taking another major step towards godhood. Saint Rebecca, Saint Rebecca, Saint Rebecca. Breakthroughs could happen in every battle. It was a phenomenon that frequently delighted one side, but also frustrated the opposite side. Breakthroughs couldn't be controlled and predicted with certainty. There were so many variables involved in this process that no one could guarantee that it might happen. It just so happened that the circumstances surrounding the fight against the shock shell were just right to allow Venerable Rebecca Andis to take the step that countless expert pilots dreamed about. The high pressure exerted by the riot and the first sword played an indispensable role in pushing her to this extent. It couldn't be helped. Venerable Orphan and Venerable Deci may have entered into battle with a plan in mind, but Venerable Rebecca's enormous will and the Shellshock's incredible performance were so threatening that the Larkinson expert pilots had to fight with all of their strength just to hang onto the battle. The pair had no choice but to do their best and exert maximum pressure onto the shock shell in order to defeat the powerful expert hybrid Mech. The riot and the first sword were not in a good condition at the moment. Their Mech had not just been flung away by force, but they also became exposed by the powerful electrical storms fueled by Venerable Rebecca's powerful outburst of forced resonance. Both expert Mechs lost a lot of control as arcs of powerful electricity continued to course through their frames. Read novel Fulmi. Delicate components that were never designed to endure so much current began to fry and melt, while other parts experienced so much stress that they froze up completely. Though the expert pilots tried their best to resonate with their expert Mechs to suppress and remove the persistent electrical bolts, the extraordinary energies were driven by qualitatively stronger willpower and could not be removed so easily. Shoot them down. There is no better chance than to eliminate the two Larkinson expert Mechs than now. Several Mech units hailing from the Blackened Reapers directed their accurate firepower towards the riot and the first sword. Though the powerful armor of the two Larkinson expert Mechs were still strong enough to withstand a lot of mundane firepower, their condition was anything but perfect at the moment. Not only were their expert pilots unable to resonate with their expert Mechs as much as before, but the cracks and holes generated by the shock shell's earlier attacks also represented dangerous vulnerabilities that could more easily be exploited by other Friedayman Mechs. As Vess glanced at the telemetry that the two expert Mech were still able to transmit back to the main fleet, he grew increasingly more distressed at their conditions. Vess didn't worry too much about the condition of the expert Mechs. Though it was not pleasant to see them get fried before his eyes, at worst, he and his fellow Mech designers would just fix them back together after the battle. What he was truly concerned about was the state of their expert pilots. If any of those powerful electrical currents penetrated through the reinforced cockpits and fried the fragile organic bodies of the expert pilots inside, then the Larkinson clan would suffer a serious loss. Evacuate the Riot and the First Sword. The Friday men are already beginning to attack their frames, so pull away quickly and bring them to the rear. Read novel Fulmy. Fortunately, the Larkinson army had already been preparing for an emergency like this. Several sword-maiden mechs that had been hovering in the vicinity flew forward and quickly shielded the paralyzed expert mechs from further ranged attacks. The second swords and other mech that held onto the limbs of the disabled expert mech began to suffer considerable shocks as the electrical currents passed on from their initial targets. Unlike the Riot and the First Sword, the ordinary mech of the Larkinson clan were not able to withstand these attacks. Several mech pilots got electrocuted within seconds after the dangerous current had transferred to their machines. Eject from your mechs as soon as you grab hold of the Riot and the First Sword, Legion Commander Sendra instructed. Saving our expert pilots is our highest priority. Use your mechs to hold onto the expert mechs in order to drain away the electrical current. A succession of sword-maiden mechs did not flinch and held onto the Riot and the First Sword in quick succession. As soon as an electrical current flowed away from one of the expert mechs, the sword-maiden pilot did not hesitate and ejected from their doomed machine. The sword-maidens ultimately paid the price of around 16 quality sword-maiden mechs in order to completely neutralize Venerable Rebecca's horrible resonance-empowered electric current. Vess briefly sighed in relief when he confirmed that the two expert mechs held up to an extent. Much of their internal systems may have been fried, but the sword maidens intervened as fast as they could. Though the two disabled expert mechs no longer transmitted any data about the condition of Venerable Orphan and Venerable Deceased, Vess simply called up the Larkinson mandate and concentrated for a moment to confirm their conditions through the turbulent Larkinson network. There's a greater problem at hand. The outcome of the battle between the three expert mechs was extremely unfavorable to the attacking side. Two powerful expert mechs of the Larkinson clan had been put out of play. Meanwhile, the sundered phalanx had not only gained an extremely powerful ace pilot, but also one that could change the entire trend of the ongoing battle with her newfound strength. Everyone became shocked when the shock shell exploded with so much energy. Hundreds of meters of space became engulfed in lightning and storm clouds as Rebecca's potential became fully unleashed. A grand transformation took place inside Rebecca's mind, as the critical situation had finally pushed her past her bottleneck and initiated her transition to an energy-based life form. A sense of nirvana overcame her mind, as the old but dogged woman finally felt rewarded for all of her diligent efforts and service towards the Gage dynasty. As her life phase evolved to a higher state, Saint Rebecca spontaneously became exposed to a deeper and stronger form of power. Her willpower underwent such a powerful transformation that it not only became a lot more solid, but was also able to propagate at much larger distances than before. I have become the storm. Venerable Rebecca's affinity with electromagnetism had reached a higher level. Of course, an expert pilot such as herself possessed a relatively limited understanding of the scientific concept of electromagnetism. She mostly focused her attention on electricity and barely paid any attention to magnetism. Regardless, Rebecca's choice meant that her unfolding and solidifying domain field became so infused with lightning bolts that it looked as if the entire space around the shock shell had turned into a miniature, storm-covered planet. Just as Saint Rebecca was about to complete her rapid transformation, a thick and arcing energy beam abruptly pierced through the shell shock's evolving Saint Kingdom and accurately punched through the side of the shell shock's frame. The bent energy beam may have lost a bit of power after cutting through the extraordinary lightning storm, but it still possessed enough power to accurately pierce through one of the cracks in the armor and destroy a whole host of internal components. The shell shock abruptly seemed to freeze after getting struck. The storm around it began to flicker and fade, as if someone had just poked a hole in a balloon. The extremely powerful ranged attack had not only managed to overcome the shell shock's nascent domain field, but also broke through the high-tier expert Mech's damaged, but still intact transphasic armor plating in a single strike. Venerable Stark has saved us. The shell shock is broken. The Amaranto is too powerful. The Friday men will be angry after we ruined Rebecca's moment. This was an unimaginable setback to the Friday men who were hoping that their new ace pilot would reverse the tide of the battle. It turned out that Venerable Stark had already been waiting to take action all this time. Both Vess and General Verl had given her instructions in advance. Though it would have been best if the Amaranto could save its strongest shot for later, if Venerable Rebecca truly broke through, then she had to be stopped at all cost. From the moment the shell shock unleashed a storm of massive proportions, Venerable Stark already received the green light. Janzi. I'm here. The shield of Samur had already been moving away from the spirit of Bentheim and hovered near the Gorgonean that the Amaranto had been using as its trench. Up until this point, the Amaranto and the Star of Liberation had been pinning each other down, restraining both of them from directing their firepower to other expert Mechs. This status quo abruptly collapsed from the moment the shield of Samur flew forward and utilized its massive defenses to shield the Amaranto from incoming attacks. No matter what kind of powerful dual energy beams the Star of Liberation fired with its custom Slipstream rifle, the shield of Samur's strained but intact defenses forcefully withstood the attacks. Take as much time as you need, Stark, Venerable Janzi said as she gritted her teeth. My shield of Samur will do whatever it takes to give you the opportunity to launch your strike. The expert Heavy Space Knight also convened the same sentiment to Venerable Stark and the Amaranto. I don't need that much time. What Venerable Stark needed was just a brief moment that was free of interruption to charge her next attack. She fully resonated with her instrument of vengeance and pumped as much conventional energy and true resonance into the weapon as possible in order to accumulate as much power as possible. She made sure to switch the powerful Luminar crystal rifle's attack pattern to a light beam in order to better resist Saint Rebecca's extremely powerful forced resonance. On top of that, Venerable Stark also resonated with the Illustrious One in order to gain the Design Spirit's blessing and power. The Amaranto's Luminar crystal rifle began to glow in rainbow colors after Venerable Stark activated a prime ability that was meant to utilize the Illustrious One's power to bypass resonance shields and other defenses. Venerable Stark soon locked onto her target and estimated her chances of inflicting a crippling or fatal blow. She shook her head a second later. This isn't enough. I need more. Fortunately, Vess already anticipated this need. Though he was situated all of the way inside the bridge of the spirit of Bentheim, Vess still possessed a small but intimate bond with all of his masterwork Mechs, which also included the Amaranto. Vess began to employ a rare self-developed technique that he had taken to calling remote energy channeling to activate his connection to the Amaranto. Once he opened up this channel, he immediately shoved Blinky through connection and forced him to appear inside the Amaranto. Vess experienced a huge amount of strain after doing this, but he gritted his teeth and commanded Blinky to infuse the instrument of vengeance with almost all of the work-law energy that the companion spirit had accumulated inside the crystal, embedded into his forehead. Emro. Blinky did not hesitate to do as instructed. The mystical work-law energy that served as the greatest source of strength of the Alsha race now infused the Amaranto's Luminar crystal rifle with an additional type of energy. Once the instrument of vengeance became so overloaded by several different kinds of energy that its internals were beginning to suffer from the strain, Venerable Stark finally pulled the trigger. The combined efforts of Venerable Stark, the Amaranto, the Illustrious One, and Blinky produced such an awe-inspiringly powerful light beam that it soared across the battlefield like a ray of destruction and overcame the strong but not entirely Saint Kingdom surrounding the shellshock. In fact, from the moment that Venerable Stark went all out and leveraged every possible source of empowerment, the outcome had already been doomed. If Venerable Rebecca had stabilized her breakthrough to ace pilot and had a proper ace mech at her disposal, the Amaranto probably wouldn't have succeeded. Unfortunately, the new ace pilot's circumstances were anything but ideal. The high-tier expert mech that she used to be so proud of had turned into a liability that held her back from exerting greater strength. As the lightning storm surrounding the shellshock faded completely, it became clear that while the expert mech may have lost functionality, its new ace pilot was probably still alive. Save St. Rebecca. Don't let the Larkinsons or Hexers finish the job. This time, it was the turn of the Friday men to make a sacrificial play to save their incapacitated pilot. The Medallion Guards did not hesitate at all and surged forward by the hundreds, not caring that they were breaking up their formations or messing up the sundered phalanx's battle plans. In fact, the commanding officers had already issued priority orders to save St. Rebecca's life and bring her back at any cost. Don't let the Friday men take her away. The extremely vengeful and concerned Hexers attempted to stop the Medallion Guards from rescuing their new ace pilot, but the Friday men mechs fought with such frenzy that none of the efforts succeeded. The faces of many Hexer officers turned ugly. This is a disaster. If the Gage dynasty gains another ace pilot, then we will gain an extremely powerful enemy in the future. Madness erupted around the battlefield. The emergence of a brand new ace pilot for the Gage dynasty completely boosted the faith and confidence of the mech pilots of the sundered phalanx. The Medallion Guards especially became ecstatic after one of their longtime heroes finally attained the dream that everyone in their profession wished to attain. Not only that, but the appearance of a new ace pilot could completely turn the tide against the attackers. With an extra asset on the battlefield that could temporarily exert almost as much strength as a genuine ace mech, there was a lot that St. Rebecca Andis and her shock shell could do, from destroying enemy expert mechs with ease to wiping out entire mech regiments within minutes. Unfortunately for the Fridayman soldiers, their newfound jubilation and confidence quickly crashed when the Amaranto unleashed its strongest possible attack, disabling the shock shell to such an extent that it was no longer able to accommodate the new saint's immense power. Vess dropped to his chair as he became a lot more exhausted. Blinky had quickly left the Amaranto and returned to his mind. The star cat looked tired and dimmed, as the cat imparted a serious quantity of worklaw energy to the masterwork expert mech. The Amaranto's super attack was a trump card that Vess would have preferred to save until later. Vess would have preferred to save it up in case St. Jeremiah Gage and his Neo Amadeus showed up and fought a hard battle against Patriarch Reginald Cross and the Mars. Read novel Fulmy. If the battle between the two did not go as smoothly as he wished, then he could have employed the Amaranto to fire its most powerful shot at the Neo Amadeus at a critical moment. Damn, what a waste. If Venerable Orphan and Venerable Deci adopted a better approach and stuck to the plan from the beginning, then maybe Rebecca Andis wouldn't have been so desperate to seek greater strength. There was no point in admonishing the two expert pilots at the moment. Right now, madness had erupted on the battlefield. The fall of 3 expert mechs in quick succession had significantly disrupted the center of the battlefield. The attacking side still maintained a decent amount of cohesion. The Hexer mech units that previously fought against the Medallion Guards had directed all of their efforts towards destroying the crippled, but not broken shellshock, that was carrying the Gage dynasty's latest ace pilot. The strategic importance of denying the Fridaymen another ace pilot was extremely crucial. The strength of St. Rebecca Andis, once she settled into her new life phase and obtained a proper ace mech, was horrendously high. Her existence could readily change the balance of power between the Friday colonies and the Hex Federation. As such, it should not be a surprise that a huge number of Hexer Mech pilots no longer obeyed their previous instructions and wordlessly combined their efforts to slaughter the new ace pilot when she was at her most vulnerable point. Don't let the Friday men evacuate the new Fridayman Saint from the battlefield. General Aliski Victrix issued a general directive to all of her Mech units. The future of the Hex Federation is at stake. An enormous disaster might befall our colonial state if St. Rebecca Andis stays alive. Her words hardly made a difference, as killing enemy high-ranking Mech pilots was already engraved in the bones of the participants of the Komodo War. We're not killing the medallion guards fast enough. Where's our fire support? We need more artillery to blast open their wall of mechs. A large proportion of Hexer melee and ranged mech units unscrupulously assaulted the medallion guard mechs with everything they had at their disposal. In turn, the Friday men mech units did their best to provide cover for the damaged shell shock that was being dragged away at great speed. Madness. Vess had already grown shocked when Rebecca Andis managed to win the lottery and break through during this battle. He became shocked yet again when he saw how both the Friday men and Hexers threw aside every rational thought in their minds and gave in to extreme emotional impulses. Few Mech pilots who were in a position to intervene followed any sensible orders anymore. They no longer adhered to any formations and completely disregarded rules such as maintaining a healthy distance between their mechs. Though the Larkinson clan did not get caught up in this madness, Vess quickly realized that it was a terrible idea to leave a powerful enemy alive. I can't allow her to get away. Aside from trying to nip an extremely dangerous threat in the bud, Vess also had other reasons to neutralize St. Rebecca. Vess looked at the projected feeds and quickly concluded that the current measures were not enough to kill St. Rebecca. The Medallion Guards Mech Division might not field any modern Heartland-level mechs, but their inherently large and tough machines offered enough protection to resist the huge amount of attacks that the Hexers were throwing in their direction. Even though all of the concentrated firepower were knocking down the Medallion Guards in rapid succession, there were still thousands more machines that were ready to do their part to save their new half-god's life. If that wasn't enough, more Fridayman mechs were pouring in from elsewhere. These mech units did not hesitate to stop their efforts to hold back the attacking mechs in order to provide the Medallion Guards with much-needed backup. Though all of the movements had made the defensive lines of the sundered phalanx a lot more vulnerable than before, Vess wasn't in the mood to celebrate. Reginald, Vess opened a communication channel to the Cross Patriarch. When are you taking action? St. Rebecca Andis is too powerful of an enemy to keep alive. The most powerful mech pilot of the Golden Skull Alliance sneered. It's too late. There is no glory and honor to be found in attacking Rebecca Andis when she is infirm and lacking access to a working mech. There is only value in defeating her when she is in a proper fighting state. Vess wanted to spit out blood when he heard this response. What are you talking about? Glory and honor is worthless in the face of survival. Glory and honor is everything, Reginald furiously insisted with all of his will. It is through worthy deeds that we put our stamp on history and live on after our glorious deaths on the battlefield. A non-combatant like you would never understand. Vess looked utterly confused. What does this have to do with your refusal to pick off St. Rebecca Andis? Don't tell me that her shell shock is out of range or that there are too many mechs in the way. I personally worked to integrate the Arceus system into your Mars. You should easily be able to snipe an inoperable expert mech under these circumstances. That may be true, but I would rather vanquish over Rebecca when the deed is worthy enough. There is a large difference between occupying a half-broken expert mech or an ace mech at peak condition. I will not tarnish my honor and reputation among fellow ace pilots by butchering one of our own under cowardly circumstances. The man's egoistic answers frustrated Vess. Patriarch Reginald always insisted on doing things his way, but that had never been as big of a problem as today. The cross-patriarch's selfish decision could easily lead to the deaths of many friends and family if Saint Rebecca Andis ever recovers and launches a revenge attack. Besides, even if I take action, it won't work, Reginald added. What do you mean by that? Vess asked. I can sense Jeremiah Gage is on guard, the cross-patriarch clarified. He's not too far away. No matter what I do, the enemy ace pilot will not allow me to intervene. If I make a move, he will block my move. Then we will commence our promised duel. Isn't it worth it to make an attempt? Vess questioned. Your Mars has a great advantage in ranged combat, while the Neo Amadeus is presumably not as good at intervening from a distance. Patriarch Reginald glowered. As I have already said, you don't understand. Even if I am able to end the life of Rebecca Andis by one reason or another, I will be entering into my first duel against another ace pilot in disgrace. My honor as a warrior will be tarnished, which will prevent me from fighting against my real opponent at my best. Meanwhile, Jeremiah Gage will occupy the high ground. He will be fighting in the name of justice, righteousness, and retribution. This disparity is enough to affect the outcome of our duel. The man's attitude toward Saint Jeremiah Gage had noticeably become more respectful. Apparently, Reginald changed his tune now that the unseen enemy ace pilot had come close enough for the two to get a read on each other. Vess furrowed his brows. If he was in the place of Patriarch Reginald, then he would pay no attention at all to notions such as honor, glory, justice, righteousness, and other artificial human concepts. Who cared about all of this superfluous crap when his own lives and the lives of his people were at stake? Honor and glory should never come at the expense of survival. Then again, Vess wasn't one of the few incredible warriors that had the strength, discipline, talent, and fortune to become one of the few living half-gods in human society. Vess gained an even deeper understanding of Patriarch Reginald Cross as a person from this conversation. This guy was even harder to deal with than expected. He truly stuck to his principle that attaining glory and honor was a higher priority than preserving his own life. Knowing how stubborn high-ranking Mech pilots could be, Vess no longer quibbled with Patriarch Reginald. Knowing when to give up and retreat was an essential skill to a leader. You go do your thing, then. Vess sighed in exasperation. I will be fine with anything you decide as long as you can defeat or at least stall Saint Jeremiah Gage. Patriarch Reginald grinned in obvious anticipation. You don't need to be concerned about that. I can tell he is a tough opponent, but that makes our upcoming duel all the more significant. My clan will sing the tale of my first fight as an ace pilot for centuries to come. His role was so essential that Vess really couldn't do anything but ensure that Patriarch Reginald had his way in anything. It made Vess feel incredibly frustrated because he disliked the necessity of relying on a loose cannon. He closed the communication channel and turned to General Verl instead. What can we do to ensure that Saint Rebecca Andis will die? Vess immediately asked. Why would we want to kill her, sir? Pardon. There is no particular reason for us to prioritize her demise. Vess, let me rephrase that. The benefit of keeping her alive is greater than if we pay a heavy price to kill her under heavy protection. I am not following you. Explain to me what you have in mind. General Verl sighed. Look at the sundered phalanx right now. Their center line has already turned into a mess. The Mech divisions deployed adjacent to the Medallion Guards have all been sucked into the vortex that is the shock shell. The Fridayman Mech pilots are putting so much effort into escorting their new ace pilot safely off the battlefield that they have introduced enormous flaws in their defensive arrangements. Look at our Hexer allies. Their Mech units are already taking enormous advantage of this by shredding the exposed sundered phalanx Mech units with much greater ease than before. While it is true that the Hexers are mainly trying to target St. Rebecca's life, they are still earning a profit even if they miss out on the main prize. Now that Verl mentioned it, the sudden offensives by the Hexers did not look as reckless and disorganized as before. Their Mech units might be scrambling to eliminate St. Rebecca, but all of their attacks were taking out a punishing amount of Friedayman Mechs while suffering few losses in return. Vess finally understood the general's point. Are you saying that we should use St. Rebecca as bait to keep messing up the sundered phalanx? That is exactly what I am saying, sir. General Verl smiled. Let me put it in terms that you can understand. Previously, I judged that our chances of achieving victory on the battlefield is 60%. Now that this unexpected surprise has occurred, our chances of winning have jumped to 80%. It is all but certain that our regular Mech units will be able to overrun the sundered phalanx Mech divisions. The main reason why my confidence isn't higher is because St. Jeremiah Gage and certain powerful expert pilots can single-handedly reverse the outcome through relying on their personal strength. I see. I understand now why you would want to exploit the current situation, but have you ever thought of what a terrible price we might pay in the future if we let a hostile ace pilot slip from our grasp? Don't forget that she has likely built up a grudge against our clan due to our participation in Operation Saturday Market. General Verl nonchalantly shrugged. We can worry about future concerns another time. We should pay much more attention to our immediate survival than to plan for nebulous threats in the future. We should not compromise an easier path to victory to solve a hypothetical danger that might not even be relevant if our clan collapses because of making the wrong decisions during this battle. After a short discussion, Vess eventually acquiesced to General Verl's stance. The Larkinsons truly couldn't afford to gamble with their lives and the future of their clan. It was a great taboo to underestimate the enemy or assume that they were already defeated. Besides, General Verl put forth another argument that put down any thoughts of trying to kill St. Rebecca Andis. Humanity needs ace pilots. The Mech Trade Association is not entirely opposed to ace pilots challenging each other, because the Mechers recognize that this is an essential part of their progression. Killing an ace pilot when she has just advanced and is not in a position to showcase her newfound strength does not align with the interests of the MTA. We will most definitely strain our relationship with the association and damage our reputation in the Mech community if we commit this cowardly act. Vess frowned deeper. The implication was that the MTA might intervene if St. Rebecca Andis was truly at risk of dying today. I understand. Proceed with what you are doing, then. As you have said, winning this battle is our main objective. We can think about other matters once we have removed the more immediate threats. Read novel Fulme. Thank you, sir. Vess turned his attention back to the ongoing battle. Whether the Hexers were earnest about killing off St. Rebecca Andis or not, they were certainly harvesting a lot of Mech at the moment. Due to the chaotic and disorganized reposition of Friedayman Mechs, it became a lot easier to pick them off at range. Hexer-ranged Mechs were having a great time attacking the more fragile and vulnerable Mechs of the sundered phalanx. Even the hardier Mechs from Mech divisions, such as the Medallion Guards, were getting eliminated in droves due to the sheer amount of firepower pouring in from multiple directions. The Hexer melee Mechs were starting to make progress as well. Though the Hexers had to be careful not to lose cohesion and make themselves vulnerable to reprisal, their assault-oriented machines were starting to make great progress in overrunning the lagging Friedayman Mech units. The Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II model and its many variants happened to excel under these circumstances. A lot of Friedayman Mechs had either broken up their defensive formations or outright turned their backs against the Hexers. This allowed the relatively faster Valkyrie Mechs to charge forward and run down the slowpokes. Entire Friedayman Mech units became impaled with spears. Though there were plenty of cases where the professional soldiers of the sundered phalanx regained their wits and reformed their lines, They became vulnerable to flanking attacks without too many friendly Mechs by their side. There were also tougher opponents, however. The Medallion Guards especially tried to maintain near-solid walls made out of tough and heavy Mechs in an attempt to block or slow down Hexer pursuit. Though it was fairly easy to shield the crippled shock shell against ranged attacks, it would be a lot harder to preserve St. Rebecca if its escort became overwhelmed by a flood of Hexer melee Mechs. The modern Valkyrie Mechs were less capable of breaking through these obstacles. The death glows imparted by Helena might be strong enough to waver the hearts of Mech pilots, but the Medallion Guards still managed to overcome the fear and threat of death by putting their faith in St. Rebecca. Just like Patriarch Reginald, the brave soldiers of the Medallion Guards readily put their values and beliefs above their need to preserve their lives. Fanatics, they're all fanatics. The rabid behavior of the sundered phalanx, and especially the Medallion Guards, reminded Vess too much of religious nutjobs. Instead of abiding by common sense, these soldiers were all willing to put their mechs and their lives at risk just to evacuate a single VIP off the battlefield. None of the Fridayman Mech pilots looked as if they were forced to buy time for St. Rebecca's escape. They all volunteered for the job without a word, and did not even seem to care that their impulsive actions might hasten their overall defeat. The only way the Gaugers could be driven to this point was if they truly revered ace pilots, such as St. Rebecca Andis, as deities. Even though the Valkyrie Mechs couldn't shake the strong beliefs of the Fridayman Mech pilots with their death glows, the Marauder Mechs were still able to achieve at least some results against the tougher and more organized Fridayman Mech units. Fortunately, heavier Hexer Mech units finally caught up and began to engage the defending troops in frontal combat. What was special about the mainline units of the Hex army was that they happened to include Mechs provided by the Larkinson clan. A few of them were familiar sights to the veterans of the Hex army. For example, the blessed Squire Mark Roman II, that the design department had updated for the Hexers, finally brought this Mech concept into space battles. Though Vess, Gloriana, and other collaborators still developed a land-bound variant of the blessed Squire, the increased importance of space battles in the new frontier meant that the spaceborne version had become the base model of this Mech line. There weren't a lot of blessed Squires present in every Hexer Mech company, but there was not much of a need to include more. The blessed Squire model still functioned as a defensive Mech that was able to support the surrounding troops with 6 different aspects of the superior mother. Most of the time, the blessed Squire defaulted to the life phase of existence of Hexism. This was a supportive glow that injected a lot of optimism in the hearts and minds of Hexer Mech pilots without causing them to go overboard. However, as soon as the situation on the battlefield changed in a drastic way, General Aliski Victrix directly instructed the blessed Squire to switch to another glow. Assume the godhood phase of existence. It is difficult to shake the conviction of the enemy, but we can still give our own soldiers the drive to press their enemies to the fullest. The blessed Squires gained a substantially different character once their male Mech pilots switched the glows of their machines. While the superior mother was still the source of the influence they exerted to surrounding Mechs, the difference was that the blessed Squires lost their modest and sunny character. Instead, they suddenly became a lot more aggressive and domineering, which fell exactly in line with the mentality of most Hexer Mech pilots. The effects of this change were obvious. Every Hexer Mech unit showed less caution and made more daring attack runs in order to destroy as many enemy Mechs as possible. Though the dangerous assaults also caused the Hexers to suffer more casualties than before, the Friday men were most definitely suffering more. Vess found it quite scary to see how a simple change in glow could induce such a major change in the mentalities of the Hexer Mech pilots. The glows of the blessed Squire could not possibly have such a strong effect if the Hexers weren't devoted towards the superior mother. Just like how the existence of St. Rebecca Andis drove the Fridayman Mech pilots mad, the influence of the superior mother was enough to drive the Hexer Mech pilots wild. In that regard, the blessed squire is still useful and relevant to the Hexer army, Vess concluded. Besides, the blessed Squire Mark Roman II still retained the energy resupply and energy siphoning systems of before. Hexer R and D institutions had actually developed vastly improved versions of the original component designs. The Hexer researchers and developers had revised them from the ground up and specifically designed them according to the exact needs and standards of the blessed Squire Mark Roman II and the Hex army. As such, the blessed Squire Mark Roman II was not only able to siphon energy from fallen mechs at greater speeds, but also transfer surplus energy to friendly Hexer mechs with minimal interruption. The utility of the blessed Squire Mark Roman II was so good under many different circumstances that the penitent sisters and glory seekers had adopted it as well. Almost every mech company was accompanied by at least one copy of the supportive Space Knight model. Aside from providing the Hex army with updates to their old mainstays, such as the blessed Squire Mark Roman II and the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II, the Larkinson clan had also developed new and original mech designs that functioned differently than other models. Vess was particularly proud of a mech model that had already been showing their value on the battlefield for a while. The unmistakable feminine mech model had become a new favorite for many Hexer mech pilots. Though the Valkyrie Redeemer line had also earned a lot of fans among the Hexers, its fairly light construction and its lack of depth in frontal combat made it unsuitable for anything but maneuver warfare. In order to solve the Hex army's need to field a sturdier mech that could also punch above of its weight, Vess and Gloriana had worked hard to brainstorm a fantastic new concept that fulfilled most of the requirements set by the Hexers. The result of all of their efforts was a Hexer hero mech that immediately stood out from other machines due to the fact that they wore battle skirts most of the time. These skirts were made out of many modular armor plates. Though they added a significant amount of extra bulk to the hero mech, their presence also made the new Hexer mech model tough enough to absorb a lot more attacks than the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II. Armed with both a mech sword and a different rifle types depending on the variant, the new hero mech model was not a mech that was suitable for beginners, but the Hex army did not lack for talented and skilled mech pilots. The Hexers put a lot of emphasis on training a lot of elite female mech pilots, and many of them were both competent in ranged and melee combat. The new model proved to be even more versatile than the Valkyrie Redeemer. The new Hexer hero mech was able to put a lot of enemies under fire during the earlier phases of the ongoing battle. Now that the Fridayman lines were collapsing, the skirted hero mechs charged forward and did not hesitate to engage the enemy mechs in close combat. What was especially ingenious about the new model was that they could easily break up their battle skirts and reposition the individual modular plates to reinforce the chest or form a physical shield on the arm that used to hold a mech rifle. The incredible versatility of this new mech model and their unmistakable feminine design aesthetics prompted Vess and Gloriana to name it the Maiden of Adversity. No matter how a battle changes, the Maiden of Adversity will always be able to cope with the situation. Our Maiden of Adversity is performing well in this battle, Gloriana's projection preened. I told you the Hexers would love it. Just look at how eagerly their mech pilots are making use of its different functions. Our new design looks so beautiful as well. Sarah Voikin has done an excellent job at making the battle skirt system both stylish and useful. Why do I have the idea that you pay more attention to style than utility? Vess asked. That's because the Hexers refuse to pilot ugly or overly masculine mechs, Gloriana explained. Do you know how difficult it is to convince Hexers to pilot heavier and more cumbersome machines? Piloting a fat and ugly mech is considered a punishment in Hexer society. This is why this responsibility is usually left for male mech pilots. I see. The battle skirt system was exactly what its name implied. It was the defining feature of the Maiden of Adversity and spiced up what would otherwise come across as a relatively boring hero mech model. Vess had initially designed the Maiden of Adversity as an evolution of the hero mechs he designed in the past. With the experiences he gained and the lessons he learned from designing the Transcendent Messenger, the Ouroboros, and most notably the Evertshanger, Vess attempted to develop a hero mech that was economic enough to be mass-produced, but powerful enough to add real value to a mech roster. It was the invention of the battle skirt system that truly turned the Maiden of Adversity into a successful model. By default, it was arranged in a skirt that covered the legs and part of the torso, in order to make it look good while at the same time keeping the redundant armor plating out of the way when they weren't needed. When the Maiden of Adversity was not under heavy attack, it was able to wield its weapons faster and more flexibly because its arms and upper torso weren't weighed down by a lot of armor plating. Read novel Fulmi. However, the reason why the mech was called this way was that whenever it encountered any form of adversity, it could break up its battle skirts and reposition the modular armor plating in different configurations. The brilliant part about the battle skirt system was that it not only came with a bunch of pre-programmed configurations, but also allowed the mech pilot or other clever people to dynamically program their own layouts. For example, one configuration could turn the mech into a space knight complete with tower shield. Another configuration could reposition most of the modular plating to form a shield at the rear in order to protect the flight system and prevent the Maiden of Adversity from getting shot down during a retreat. The modular armor plating could even be stacked on top of each other to prevent a powerful attack from inflicting a fatal blow to the mech. The concept of the battle skirt system is simple but incredibly useful if properly used. Sarah Voikin explained during a meeting on the design project. The main problem with armoring mechs is that they are vulnerable in every direction, but cannot carry as much armor as needed. Whether it is cost or capacity limitations, there is only so much armor that you can apply to a mech. Gloriana nodded in understanding. If this wasn't the case, then all of us would be designing heavy mechs for a living. Over the years, mech designers have experimented with many different rules, philosophies, and standards. Sarah continued. Eventually, the mech industry has agreed on a general standard. The torso and especially the upper part of it must offer the best protection. The front side of a mech must also be covered by thicker armor plating than the rear side. Mechs that follow this standard always perform better than ones that deviate from it. This is not a surprise, since mechs often end up in battle situations that cause them to receive most attacks on the front torso. There are exceptions, though, Vess remarked. That is true, sir. That is also one of the dilemmas that mech designers are struggling with. There is a spectrum between applying armor plating as evenly as possible across a mech frame and putting the greatest possible protection at the sections that are more critical and more often get targeted. Gloriana crossed her arms. The problem with the former approach is that they go down faster in the most prevalent battle scenarios. The problem with the latter approach is that the mechs are incredibly weak if they get outflanked. These are both undesirable outcomes, but given that mechs often deploy in greater numbers, it is generally better to lean towards the latter approach and hope that friendly mechs can cover each other's rears. Sarah Voikin grinned. What if that isn't strictly necessary anymore? This design project is a great opportunity for us to explore a less common arrangement that no longer forces a mech to stick to one or the other approach. By adopting a modular auxiliary armor system that allows the mech to dynamically reposition a part of its own armor plating in different ways, will mean that the mech pilot can always adopt the right armor configuration for the right situation. Vess' eyes lit up. He loved this idea. It also happened to be extremely suitable for hero mechs, which were already known and desired for their versatility. He already imagined many different ways the battle skirt system could offer tremendous help to the hero mechs. The mechs could form their own walls with firing slits by putting all of their modular armor plating in front. This made it a lot more practical for them to fight at range without relying on space knights. Vess became more optimistic about the battle skirt system when he weighed all of the pros and cons. Being able to dynamically rearrange the modular armor plating is no substitute to carrying more solid fixed armor, but it is a good compromise and stopgap measure. We can keep the total mass and volume of the hero mech under control, while at the same time enjoying a lot of the benefits of heavier and more armored mechs. It won't be easy to implement such a complicated and elaborate auxiliary armor system, Gloriana warned. I can already foresee the need to develop a complex control mechanism, as well as many different mechanical adjustments, in order to allow the modular armor plating to reposition and affix itself in place. If we don't make it solid enough, it will be too easy for enemy attacks to break the battle skirt system by relying on brute force. After a lot of exploration, the mech designers eventually concluded that while it was possible for them to add the battle skirt system to a hero mech, the cost of making it viable and worthwhile enough was rather high. Our penitent sisters will readily be able to field this mech because our clan is wealthy enough to afford the expense of adopting this interesting new model. Vess issued his judgment. This interesting variation of a hero mech also conforms to the martial tradition of the penitent sisters. I can already imagine it as an excellent complement to the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II model. P. Gloriana had to think a bit longer about this issue. The Glory Seekers will also field it. They follow the elite route, so it is still acceptable to include this new product in their mech roster. The only problem is that it will be a bit difficult to find enough mech pilots that are proficient in both ranged and melee combat. Talents that are skilled in both are always rare, as most mech academies encourage specialization after mastering the basics. Read novel Fulmi. Most ranged mech pilots were able to handle a sword or knife, while most melee mech pilots knew how to shoot a rifle. However, there was a huge difference between learning the basics and mastering all of the necessary combat skills to a professional level. Higher than average talent, learning ability, or genetic aptitude were pretty much indispensable to piloting hero mechs. Everyone else that tried to pilot a hero mech would certainly regret it when they inevitably lost control or got outclassed in actual battle. The Hex army should be better off in this regard, Gloriana said after she briefly exchanged messages with one of her relatives over the galactic net. When the Hexers evacuated to the Red Ocean, they brought as many elites and excellent talents as possible. Many of the mech pilots serving in the Hex army today represent the best and brightest of the former Hexadric hegemony. They're also fairly young, so they should more easily be able to adapt to our innovations. They no longer had any concerns about lacking sufficient users for their brilliant new hero mech design after hearing this. Even if the Hex army did not have enough mech pilots in their ranks that could pilot such a complicated machine, the Hexers would certainly focus on training more as long as the end product was good enough. The importance of making this brilliant hero mech design work caused Vess to put more thought on its living aspects. One of the decisions that Vess was struggling with was deciding the right design spirits for this powerful new mech. Though he could have settled on one of the aspects of the superior mother like usual, he felt that it was not the right choice for this project. Even though we are clearly designing the Maiden of Adversity in the style of a Hexer mech, I think we should contemplate a different design spirit for this mech model. Maybe two even, Vess stated. Gloriana looked at Vess as if he had just committed heresy. How can a Hexer mech not be blessed by the superior mother? Why do Hexer mechs need to be babysat by the superior mother all the time? Vess shot back. The Hexers themselves have designed lots of mechs that have nothing to do with design spirits, and you don't see them complaining about it. While it is true that including the superior mother in our own works is a strong selling point, I don't think it is healthy for a mech force to limit their options to just a single source of power. We have many different design spirits at our disposal that are both strong and useful in their own areas of competences. His wife remained skeptical. What do you have in mind for this project then, Vess? Since this new project is based around a hero mech, I figured it would be great if it was paired with a design spirit that enhances its ranged combat capabilities and one that augments its melee combat capabilities. My suggestion would be to add the illustrious one to improve the hero mech's effective ranged performance and Zygra to make the mech more aggressive when fighting with a sword. Unacceptable. What could possibly make you think it is a good idea to combine our beautiful female hero mech with a pair of male design proto-gods? It would have made much more sense if you have chosen Kalanxo or even Titania despite their alien natures. At least they are both mothers. Vess and Gloriana became embroiled in another fight over the design spirits for the mech that would eventually become known as the Maiden of Adversity. Though Gloriana was willing to embrace more diversity and move away from the superior mother considering that many of their other Hexer mechs already carried her presence, she absolutely did not accept the influence of any male design spirits. Vess became increasingly more tired and exasperated as he argued with her on this issue. At certain times, he even wished that he had made all of his artificial design spirits female. At least he wouldn't be having this silly argument if entities such as the illustrious one were all women. Fine, have it your way then. Just know that if we go for the combination of Kalanxo and Titania, the Maiden of Adversity will have to be a bit more slanted towards defense than offensive. It's fine. We can make the battle skirt heavier and sacrifice a certain amount of mobility as long as our new Hexer mech can fight in frontal battles. The introduction of the Maiden of Adversity model invigorated the Hex army. Though the skill and proficiency requirements to effectively pilot this brand new living hero mech were much higher than that of the Valkyrie Redeemer, there were still plenty of elite Hexer mech pilots who happened to qualify, if only barely. It was extremely rare for mech pilots to be equally skilled in ranged and melee combat. Most pilots possessed a clear preference or strength in one area and somewhat tried to maintain at least some degree of competency in other areas. It didn't matter too much. While the best possible mech pilot for the Maiden of Adversity was one that could fully utilize it in every viable battle scenario, it didn't make that much of a difference if pilots were more slanted towards using its rifle or its sword. This was because the essence of employing a hero mech was to rely on its strengths to exploit an enemy mech's weaknesses. For example, an enemy melee mech could do little to nothing against the Maiden of Adversity if the latter maintained its distance while sticking to its rifle. An enemy ranged mech, on the other hand, barely had any ability to defend itself if the Maiden of Adversity managed to get close enough to use its deadly sword. As the Hexer mech pilots began to get introduced to all of the wonderful possibilities opened up by the Maiden of Adversity, the proportion of mech pilots that began to cross-strain into different skills had shot up at a prodigious rate. Only the best and most elite of us are worthy to pilot this powerful hero mech. The Larkinsons have outdone themselves. I have no doubt that this is the best hero mech in the Red Ocean. Read novel Fulme. I am not going to miss the quota that determines whether I can get assigned to the Maiden of Adversity. The powerful performance and versatile options of the latest living Hexer mech model already formed a powerful attraction to the Hexers. However, what truly sold them to this mech, to the point where its popularity quickly exceeded that of the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II, was its visual design. That was not to say that the latest iterations of the popular Valkyrie line were bad on this front. Vess had applied all of the advancements of his design style into the external appearance of the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II. His design language had become a lot more pronounced over the years, and that not only enabled him to make his Hexer Marauder mech more exquisite, but also match it to the character of Helena, who took over from her mother as the design spirit of this widely used mech line. While the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II came across as an enthusiastic young maiden that was ready to harvest the souls of the unwilling, the Maiden of Adversity exuded the vibe of an elder sister war veteran that fiercely protected its younger and weaker siblings. Regardless of their differences, They were both undeniably feminine in appearance and character, and that was what female Hexer Mech pilots cared about the most. Another notable trait about the Maiden of Adversity was that it was the first Hexer Mech that did not possess a design spirit that was directly related to the Hexer people. Most Larkinson-designed Hexer Mechs, such as the Blessed Squire and the Eternal Redemption, were watched over by different aspects of the Superior Mother. The Valkyrie Redeemer was different after its latest revision, but surprisingly enough, the Hexers did not resist the introduction of Helena to their pantheon, despite never having heard of her before. The seemingly gullible Hexers completely embraced the existence and identity of Helena as the daughter of Death and the older sister of Ves Larkinson. Regardless, Helena's association with the Valkyrie line had caused many people to label her as a Hexer goddess, though one that was a bit more accessible to outsiders. The Larkinson clan had taken a gamble when it introduced an entirely different Hexer Mech design that was watched over by not one, but two different design spirits. Kalanxo was a familiar entity to the Larkinson clan, but not so much to outsiders. Though she was not that prominent, Larkinson Mech, such as the solid and dependable rigid wall and the famous shield of Samur, propagated her presence among the clansmen. Titania was a lot less familiar to both the Larkinsons and everyone else. Ves hadn't done much with the design spirit aside from tying it to the Minerva and a few other Mech designs. This was strange because Titania was absolutely a powerful spiritual entity. Derived from an astral beast that had lived over 6 millennia, the ancient creature might have lost much of her formidable memories after her death, but the fragments that she retained still gave her a huge amount of capital in the latest chapter of her extraordinary life. The problem with Titania was that it was difficult for Ves to pair her up with the right Mech designs. Every pairing had to make sense. Ves would be doing a disservice to his Mech designs if he casually tied them to design spirits that did not align with their design concepts in the slightest. Considering Titania's extremely lengthy preoccupation with producing offspring and controlling them in battle, the only Mech that truly matched her temperament was the Minerva. Designing Mechs with command or control functions was not that simple. Ves was not in a hurry to design a mass-market version of the Minerva or anything else that could benefit from Titania's help. The Maiden of Adversity was the first proper mass production model that truly benefited from Titania's glow. This was because it took a lot of thought and control to derive the greatest possible value out of the battle skirt system. Though Hexer Mech pilots could already make good use of it by choosing the right pre-programmed configurations, the real way to use it was to dynamically rearrange the modular armor plating to fit specific situations in battle. Ves and the other Mech designers had tried to make this as easy and accessible as possible by simplifying the control interface to lowering the barrier of entry as much as possible. But the difficulty of assuming manual control over the battle skirt system was still too great. He even had the bright idea of letting Michael Larkinson contribute to the automation processes of the battle skirt system. Though the young AI specialist managed to introduce a decent amount of clever shortcuts, there was only so much the Mech pilot could offload to the Mech. The role that Titania played in this process was not essential, but she helped a lot in the utilization of the new modular auxiliary armor system. What Titania essentially did for the Maiden of Adversity was to put the Hexer Mech pilots into the right mindset and subtly teach them how to efficiently control many different elements. To put it in simpler terms, Titania taught Mech pilots how to multitask so that they could effectively manage many different elements at the same time. The results were gratifying. Though every Mech pilot initially looked a little rough when they piloted the Maiden of Adversity for the first dozen times, they gradually began to master and excel at using the battle skirt system. During the ongoing battle in Pima Prime, many of the pilots assigned to the Mech units based around the Maiden of Adversity showed excellent usage of the battle skirt system. For example, the Maiden of Adversity moved the rear and side parts of its skirts to the front and formed makeshift sniper shields during the opening stages of the battle. By turning the hero Mechs so that they essentially laid prone in space, the Maiden of Adversities minimized their silhouettes to the enemy while enjoying the maximum possible protection from frontal attacks. Now that the battle had reached a more frantic and chaotic stage, the Maidens of Adversity no longer fired energy beams because their killing efficiency was too low under the circumstances. Instead, many of them fearlessly charged forward and caught up to the slower elements of the sundered phalanx that had opted to remain behind to cover the evacuation of the shell shock. Most Maidens of Adversities had put away their rifles and transformed their battle skirts to reinforce their torsos and carry tower shields made out of interlocking plates. What was interesting about them was that many individual Mechs adopted their own variation of this popular configuration. Some of them carried larger and taller tower shields in order to better intercept incoming blows. Others carried smaller shields in order to make it easier for them to launch attacks. A few even eschewed shields entirely and added as much plating to the torso and arms as possible in order to go all out and hack their swords in a powerful two-handed grip. Vess was incredibly proud to see the Maiden of Adversity being used as he envisioned it. Just like the bright warrior Mark Roman II, he had made a decisive shift towards personalization and adaptation with the design project that produced this fantastic hero Mech. Maybe this might be my future trajectory. As the Maidens of Adversity continued to show their strength and adaptability in combat, Vess began to feel he might have found out another viable path to progress his design philosophy to senior. If he took the approach of the bright warrior Mark Roman II and the Maiden of Adversity models as examples, then he could design a lot more Mechs that prominently featured modularity and customization options. There was nothing wrong with standardized Mechs as long as they were well designed, but Vess had been so influenced by Gloriana's design philosophy that he was starting to find it more important that Mechs should more comprehensively adapt to their individual pilots. Adaptation is a form of growth, Vess eventually realized. Evolution can take place in many different forms. Previously, I've been focusing too much on the metaphysical side of it, but what if I turn my attention back on the more material side of Mech design? This design direction was not incompatible with his current design philosophy. In fact, it complemented it in several different ways. If not for the fact that Vess was already pursuing too many research directions already, he would have been tempted to explore this idea to the fullest. In the end, Vess slowly shook his head. I shouldn't bite more than I can chew. I have already decided to focus on mutual growth as my principal research direction. I haven't made that much progress in this area as of late, so why should I split my attention any further? Advancing to senior had become more and more important to him. Part of the reason why he wanted to take a few risks and embark on the Trailblazer expedition was because he thought that he might be able to gain the extraordinary inspiration he needed to achieve a breakthrough in his design philosophy. As for the interesting notion of pursuing dynamic modification and evolution through the modularization of Mechs, Vess felt that it was better to leave it up for other Mech designers. Marvane might find it fun to adopt this approach as the premise of the design philosophy. Vess smiled. Of course, there was no certainty that Marvane would choose to become a Mech designer, but a father could always hope. Vess continued to study the performance of the Maidens of Adversity. Though the Mech model exhibited its fair share of flaws and shortcomings, it was only a first-generation product that was based on a more radical design concept. Mistakes were inevitable, and Vess already resolved to address as many of them as possible when he revised the design in the future. Look, Venerable Joshua is tearing through enemy lines. The meat suit is too powerful. How can this be called a Mech? It's unstoppable. The enemy expert Mechs don't have the firepower to take it down. Vess' eyes lit up as he immediately switched his focus to Venerable Joshua's enhanced machine. This was the first time that the Evertshanger put its mounted wargear to the test in an actual battle. After years of research and development, the Larkinson clan finally debuted the infamous meat suit. The meat suit had turned into something of a money pit to the Larkinson Biotech Institute. Director Rania Wadden frequently complained about all of the development resources being poured into the ongoing R&D project. Though the meat suit performed increasingly better each time the researchers completed a new iteration, the gains didn't appear to be worth the effort anymore. Vess recalled a conversation he had with Rania about his continued support for the project. "When do you have enough, Vess?" Rania asked. "The amount of researchers and developers we have allocated to improving and optimizing the meat suit is starting to look wasteful. We could have accelerated the completion of many other useful projects, if not for the fact that we are putting so much emphasis on the development of a situational product that is only applicable to a single individual Mech. Do you truly think it is not worth it because it only applies to a single Mech? I know you like to pay more attention to Venerable Joshua, but the original Titan III project that we started out with has already undergone 2 major update cycles. The Titan V project incorporates all of the latest biotech advancements that we derived from researching the biological remains of Titania and the fish whale race. There is nothing more we can squeeze from them unless we make another breakthrough in our research. But that requires a lot of time, much more brilliant biotech researchers, or highly advanced lab equipment. Then, what do you suggest then? While we can no longer make meaningful progress on the Titan V project, we can branch out and try to apply the lessons we have learned in other biomech-related projects. Haven't you always wanted to add a biomech legion to the Larkinson army? We still have many tons of alien tissue samples left in our freezing compartments. That does make sense, but I feel the Titan V project is not fully tapped out, Vess replied. While it is true that I intend to introduce biomechs to our clan, I don't want to adopt the same old biological machines that the Life Research Association and several other states and organizations have attempted to popularize. Mainstream biomechs that rely on existing organic technologies are not attractive enough. If we want to make biomechs worthwhile enough to equip a new biomech legion, then we need to follow a different track. Rania started to understand what Vess was thinking about. So you view the Titan V project as a pioneer that might lead us to achieve a breakthrough that is powerful enough to develop a new kind of biomech. Exactly. I'm aware that the Titan V project is still far from reaching that point, but we can still dream, right? To me, this is a long-term project. We don't need to focus on quantity for the time being. Instead, do your best to elevate the quality and sophistication of the meat suit. The further we push the limits of biotechnology, and the more we combine existing knowledge with successful experiments, the greater our chance of achieving the progress that we are looking for. I am willing to wait decades to see whether we can attain the desired results. Though Rania understood Vess' bold and ambitious planning, the problem was that the time needed for this effort to bear fruit was a bit too long. Are you sure you want to keep gambling in this direction? Our Larkinson Biotech Institute has hired a lot of biotech researchers, but none of them are brilliant or accomplished enough to achieve great results. There are many other biotech research institutions that are trying to do the same as us, but are much better equipped to make actual progress. Vess crossed his arms. That may be true, but if they are all similar to the biotech experts that we have encountered back in the Life Research Association, then I don't think we need to be afraid of them. The difference between us and them is that we are probably one of the few groups that truly harnesses the power of life. All of the biomechs developed by other researchers and developers are merely alive in a biological sense. I believe that my unique advantages can unlock the greater potential of biomechs. You may be right, but are you certain you want to open this particular Pandora's box? What do you mean, Rania? Joshua has mentioned that the Titan V project has become increasingly harder to control for him. Rania reported with obvious concern. since we have opted to upgrade and modify the original Titan 3 project into the Titan 4 project, and now the Titan 5 project, its living consciousness has always remained the same. It has not only undergone years of growth, but also experienced several major body modifications that have fundamentally altered its species, if you can call it that. This is no doubt a traumatic experience and has distorted the personality of the meat suit. To be honest, a few of the researchers working on the project are starting to fear that it might go out of control. The growth of its personality is too fast, and its experiences are much different from that of your usual mechs. Vess turned around and studied the dormant meat suit carefully. Right now, the Titan 5 project was not in use, so it largely resembled a gigantic but hollow sack of alien flesh. He understood why it was able to induce so much fear. The growth of the meat suit's spiritual foundation had indeed been remarkably fast. Not only that, but Vess also sensed that its personality was a lot more primal, aggressive, and violent than usual. It was as if the meat suit was a trapped beast that couldn't wait to break open its cage. Vess grinned. Interesting. I never imagined that its personality would have become so much stronger and more belligerent after its latest upgrade. I like it. The Everchanger's personality is a bit soft. Pairing it up with such an aggressive meat suit is not a bad idea. This mounted wargear loadout is specifically meant to turn the Everchanger into a vessel of destruction. Is Venerable Joshua able to maintain control over it during the latest testing sessions? He has reported that it is difficult but still manageable to keep it under control. The Titan 5 project is only friendly when it interacts with Venerable Joshua. It is a lot more dangerous and resistant towards everyone else. Then there should be no problem. The Titan 5 project is solely meant to work together with Venerable Joshua and the Everchanger to begin with, so there is no need to change it. The stronger and more aggressive it is, the more it will pay off when we finally put it into battle. It's been years, sir. Will that time ever come? I can guarantee it, Vess smirked. Just wait until we finally move out of Davut. Once we enter into battle against a large and formidable enemy force, you should warm up the meat suit and get it ready for deployment. I want it to be the first or second loadout that the Everchanger utilizes in battle. Be sure to monitor its performance and collect as much data as possible. I imagine that it will be explosive. Explosive was a good way to put it once the meat suit debuted on the battlefield. In fact, the Everchanger did not equip the Titan 5 project at first. During the initial stages of the battle, the Everchanger was nowhere close to the enemy lines. The best way it could make itself useful at this stage was to equip the much more conventional city breaker loadout. The amount of time, money, and development effort invested in the gigantic artillery mech mounted wargear loadout was not as exaggerated as with the Titan 5 project. That did not mean it was weak, though. Perhaps it might be an exaggeration to rely on it to crush an entire city, but its firepower was leagues above the base form of the Everchanger. Though the city breaker loadout was armed with 4 oversized Luminar crystal cannons and 4 oversized Gauss cannons, Vess had deliberately designed the monstrosity to resemble the appearance of a gigantic humanoid made out of crystal. The city breaker did not look fat or bulky at all due to its reflective and luminescent exterior. Instead, it looked exotic and maybe even alien, as the glow of the illustrious one seemed to transform it into its incarnation. When the Everchanger initially entered the battlefield and started to open fire with its massive cannons, its impressive firepower already made a major difference. Defensive platforms that could take a lot of beating began to get crushed and demolished through overwhelming firepower. The calibers of all 8 cannons had reached the legal limitations that the MTA allowed for these types of weapons. Vess had done everything possible to scale up the weapon systems as much as possible before focusing on maximizing their firepower. The results were better than Vess expected. Though Venerable Joshua wasn't able to resonate as strongly with the city breaker, as with his Evertshanger due to how much harder it was to fully resonate with so much extra mass. He was still able to empower the cannons with his willpower. This was enough to amplify the destructive and penetrative properties of the City Breaker's attacks. "This is too powerful," Venerable Joshua gasped. "The power at my disposal is greater than that of a typical expert heavy artillery Mech." Though it was difficult for the City Breaker to target Mechs at longer distances, he had no problem directing its awesome firepower onto larger and more fixed targets, such as space stations and starships. Joshua found it especially enjoyable to leverage the City Breaker's great might against the Titan shields that protected many orbital space stations from massed attacks. Unfortunately, the City Breaker wasn't able to last as long as he wished. Though it was large and powerful, Vess and the other Mech designers who had worked on it did not prioritize longevity. The City Breaker not only became hotter and endured more strain as time went on, but also depleted its energy and ammunition reserves at an accelerated rate. Vess originally designed the City Breaker as a semi-disposable solution to allow the Evertshanger to inflict a huge amount of damage at the beginning stages of a battle in space. He compromised the City Breaker's ability to last and slanted many design choices towards raising its peak performance. If Vess wanted to, he could have invested in solutions that could have increased the effective operation time of the City Breaker. However, he didn't think it was worthwhile to equip it with expensive toys such as dimensional heat sinks, dimensional ammunition magazines, and extremely expensive energy cells. Even if the City Breaker was able to last twice or thrice as long, an enemy would never allow such a powerful machine to have its way. Venerable Joshua came under a lot of pressure when the Sundered Phalanx noticed the threat of the City Breaker early on. The 5640th Witch-Shatterer's Mech Division had allocated hundreds of heavy artillery Mechs to bombard this crystalline monstrosity. Though the City Breaker possessed a lot of frontal defenses, one of its greatest shortcomings was that Venerable Joshua had not grown strong enough to cover it with a resonance shield. It was too big. Perhaps it would only be possible for Venerable Joshua to do so when his resonance strength reached the level of Venerable Rebecca Andis at the start of this battle. As it was, a lot of crystalline and metallic armor plating chipped away from the City Breaker's front with every incoming attack volley. Eventually, the City Breaker's armor buffer had reached such a dire state that it wasn't safe to utilize it anymore. Venerable Joshua had already expended the majority of its energy and ammunition reserves by now, so he had no qualms about detaching his Evertshanger from the severely damaged City Breaker loadout. He had plenty of good and bad things to say about the City Breaker loadout now that he had used it in an actual battle, but that could wait until later. He needed to try another mounted wargear loadout. A group of Larkinson Mechs had already brought forth the Titan V project. Mounting it was easier than with mechanical mounted wargear. The gigantic fleshy suit eagerly engulfed the Evertshanger as if it was alive. As soon as it established a proper connection to the expert Mech and expert pilot, the Titan V project truly became ready for battle. "Let's see if you can live up to your promise, Titan." The massive meat suit began to glow as lots of energy coursed through its enormous fleshy construction. Soon enough, it generated a warp bubble that was large enough to wrap its entire form and promptly accelerated forward at a dazzling speed. The meat suit was primarily a melee Mech, so it was a necessity to bring it forward as fast as possible. Venerable Joshua is about to take action for real. "Damn, is that the rumored meat suit? It looks more monstrous than I thought." The Sundered Phalanx is about to receive an enormous beating. The mounted wargear utilized by the Evertshanger not only attracted a lot of attention from the Friday men, but also drew plenty of attention from the observers watching the live feeds of the ongoing battle. The City Breaker already looked shockingly large and powerful. Its firepower was immense, and it was bulky enough to withstand a lot of incoming attacks before Venerable Joshua had to end its run. Its unusually large size, its brief but extremely powerful performance, and its exotic crystalline visual design caused a lot of observers to fall in love with this mounted wargear loadout. It's like a Mech piloting another Mech. Why aren't we seeing this more often? Is this the complete form of the famous Evertshanger? No wonder it is called that way. Don't you realize how expensive it is to make so much oversized equipment? I don't know how much it costs exactly, but I bet that the money used to build this gigantic artillery loadout is enough to produce 5 or 6 decent expert Mechs. The public craved novelty. There was nothing more unique in this battle than the Evertshanger utilizing various mounted wargear. A lot of discussion had already erupted around the city breaker at the start. The general public mostly wondered where they could see more Mechs like this and why it wasn't more common. The Mech designers and other engineers discussed how useful and practical it was in battle. The latter group were not that easy to fool. They could clearly figure out that while mounted wargear like the city breaker might make sense in circumstances where there was a shortage of expert pilots, the costs were far too great. Read novel Fulme. Look at how much mass the artillery Mech loadout lost when it was bombarded by the Fridayman artillery Mechs. The alloys and other materials used to construct its armor must be considerably expensive if it was able to hold up so well under sustained bombardment. The Larkinson clan will have to pay a fortune to replace all of the missing armor. The inability to form a resonance shield around this giant mechanical suit is its greatest defect. As we have all seen, it is too vulnerable against massed attacks when its expert pilot isn't able to extend his resonance shield far enough to envelop the entire construction. You're better off developing a smaller but much higher quality expert Mech. Wait, the artillery Mech is not the only mounted wargear the Larkinsons have developed. Is that a bio-Mech suit? The Titan V project was a completely different beast from the City Breaker. The latter mostly looked and functioned like a Mech, but at a considerably bigger scale. Many of the same rules associated with normal Mechs could also be applied to the City Breaker without much issue. That was not necessarily the case with the Titan V project. As the enhanced Evertshanger surged towards the Fridayman Mech lines while engaging in warp travel, many people tried to figure out what it could do and how effective it would be when fighting against the sundered phalanx. It doesn't appear to carry any weapons. Is it meant to fight as a brawler Mech? That shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Look at that golden expert Mech that is punching its opponents left and right. The Larkinsons already have experience with designing high-end brawler Mechs. How can something so large move so fast? Wait a minute, is the entire meat suit infused with face water? The last remark happened to be correct. One of the most special aspects that made the Titan V project unique and difficult to replicate by other organizations was that its biological construction was largely derived out of repurposed flesh of 2 different kinds of exobests. A huge amount of tissue samples harvested from the carcass of the astral beast that used to be the previous incarnation of Titania formed the base of the meat suit's biological construction. Titania's flesh was dense, hard, and incredibly resistant towards energy damage. If her flesh was tough and strong enough to allow the astral beast to survive over 6 millennia in the Red Ocean, then it was definitely strong enough to comprise the main material of the meat suit. Originally, the Titan III project was solely centered around this biological material. It wasn't until a few years had passed that the Larkinson Biotech Institute dared to integrate selected portions of fish whale tissue into the meat suit. The best parts taken out of many different fish whale carcasses that the Larkinson clan had harvested during the Purgatory campaign went on to upgrade or evolve the meat suit depending on how it was interpreted. It took a lot of expertise and a lot of outside help for the LBI research team to even succeed in performing this process. The blending of 2 completely different biological matter taken from 2 completely different alien species was not simple. But Vess funneled so many resources to this R&D project over the years that Dr. Avalon Paris and the other researchers did not want their efforts to fail. Fortunately, the research team succeeded in blending and augmenting the meat suit with fish whale tissue. What was particularly important was that much of the additional flesh was taken from the facer fish whales. Their face water organs were particularly important because they were not only saturated with the key substance, but also contained working biological processes that originally allowed the facer fish whales to engage in spatial manipulation. Theoretically, the brilliant integration of facer fish whale flesh into the main body of the meat suit should have made it possible for it to fight like the alien creatures that once dominated a part of the purgatory pocket space. In practice, the unholy fusion was anything but perfect, and the threshold to perform any face water-derived ability was too high. It's like trying to graft gills onto your neck, Director Rania explained to Vess one day. Just because it can allow you to breathe underwater doesn't mean it will actually do so. It actually needs to be controlled in the right way in order to function properly. Right now, we know too little about the fish whales and how they activate their face water organs to perform all of their spatial manipulation abilities. In fact, it is too premature for us to integrate fish whale flesh into the Titan V project. Venerable Joshua won't be able to use the new addition to the fullest. We'll see about that, Vess smirked. There was a reason why Vess was a bit more confident that the latest revision of the meat suit would be able to fight like a facer fish whale. This was because Vess had connected it with two different design spirits. The first design spirit was, of course, Titania, because who else was better at helping Venerable Joshua familiarize himself with the meat suit's original advantages? The second design spirit was one that Vess rarely had a chance to use due to how expensive it was to design a Mech where he could play a major role. The Titan V project happened to be an excellent stage for the Phase King to fulfill its responsibility as a design spirit. Though the former sovereign of the Phase Kingdom had a bit of his memories after the Larkinsons extracted his brain from his enormous carcass, the Phase King did not lose as many memories as Titania. This meant that the Phase King retained nearly his entire mastery of face water usage. The benefits he could provide was incredible, so much so that Venerable Joshua worked extra hard to build a good relationship with the former fish whale king. Vess didn't know how, but Venerable Joshua easily managed to form a basic accord with a design spirit, despite the fact that he and his clan originally killed the Phase King and many facer fish whales. Is there any alien that Joshua can't befriend? It wouldn't be a surprise if Joshua even managed to become friends with the Voribugs one day. In any case, Venerable Joshua's ability to get along with the Titan V project, Titania and the Phase King played a crucial role in realizing the incredible potential of the meat suit. As soon as the enhanced Evert Shanger approached the battle lines of the 5,686th Razorhead Mech Division, Venerable Joshua began to connect and resonate with the Fish Whale King. Show your power, my friend. Let all of these people know that the king is back. A silent roar seemed to emanate from the meat suit as its grayish, fleshy surface began to glow and heat up. The Titan V project actively channeled energy into its fish whale tissue and manipulated them in a specific method imparted by the Phase King. Soon enough, an actual spatial storm erupted in front of the Evert Shanger. What is this? My Mech can't defend against this storm. I feel sick. Where are our spatial inhibitors? The damage was not as bad as it looked. Though the spatial storm definitely put hundreds of enemy Mechs into disarray, most of the Razorhead Mechs were able to endure the unstable spatial fluctuations without losing too much functionality. The real purpose of the spatial storm was to reduce the readiness of the enemy Mechs and Mech pilots and allow Venerable Joshua to drive his enlarged Mech in the middle of their formation. Get out of the way. Though the meat suit had dropped out of warp travel, Its speed and momentum had grown formidable enough to crash through a line of space knights and spearman mechs before slowing down. A tragic sight occurred as over a dozen mechs collapsed or tore apart due to the collisions. The Razorheads and other Freidemon mechs did not hover around and do nothing, though. Ranged mechs had been shooting at the meat suit for a while now. The Razorheads soon joined in and stabbed or chopped their weapons at the oversized biological monstrosity. Unfortunately for the Razorheads, their weapons bounced off the meat suit before they could ever touch any flesh. This was because Venerable Joshua had successfully activated a fairly powerful spatial barrier around the meat suit that served as a decent substitute for a resonance shield. Though the power consumption of the Titan V project had shot up drastically, the meat suit also came with a huge energy reserve, so Joshua did not worry too much about exhausting the meat suit too quickly. The activation of the spatial barrier happened to mitigate the greatest shortcoming of mounted wargear when applied to expert mechs. Though the constant refrain of enemy attacks accelerated the spatial barrier's depletion, Venerable Joshua still had more than enough time to do a lot of damage. Right now, it behaved like a wolf among sheep. The powerful offensive melee mechs that characterized the Razorheads looked completely helpless as the Titan V project punched and kicked their metal frames apart. Every nearby dense formation of enemy mechs fell apart within seconds as the domineering meat suit made excellent use of its enormous strength and surprisingly respectable speed. Not a single Freidemon melee mech was able to put up any sort of fight against the meat suit. No matter how much skill the pilots possessed, or how well the Gage Dynasty's masters had designed the mechs, the power disparity was too great. The Titan V project already came with a huge amount of strength and resilience. When paired with an expert pilot that had trained his fighting skills to a height that was unreachable for mortals, the combination resulted in an unstoppable biomonster. It quickly became clear that the only way the Sundered Phalanx could stop the Titan V project was to dispatch its expert mechs. At first, ranged expert mechs, such as the Tensars and the Star of Liberation, fired a few powerful shots at the meat suit. Few, if any, of their attacks yielded results. The defense of the meat suit was too great to overcome in a short amount of time. Besides, even if the attacks slowly depleted the Titan V project's spatial barrier, Venerable Joshua could still inflict a lot of damage in the meantime, because there was no one stopping his enhanced Evertshanger. This was why the Sundered Phalanx opted to dispatch its melee expert mechs to stop the meat suit's rampage. Watch out, Joshua. There are powerful enemy expert melee mechs on the way. Get ready for a real fight.